To the expanding wireless LANs and wireless LAN security, chapter 8. Hopefully by the end of the chapter we're going to be able to discuss you'll be able to discuss the wireless bridges and repeaters and how they can expand the functionality of our wireless LANs, describe how wireless controllers can simplify management of the wireless LANs, outline the design considerations, discuss how Wi-Fi Direct can make it easier for end users to share resources, synchronize their devices, and connect. Describe the developments in the use of wireless LANs in multimedia distribution, and list the security features and challenges of the IEEE and the 802.11 networks. Higher data rates and lower costs have made 802.11 wireless LANs very popular and competitive with the wired networks. Wireless LANs continue to be deployed, expanded, and enhanced at a very fast pace, especially in enterprises, as an alternative to wired Ethernet networks. This lesson wraps up everything that we've learned so far about Wi-Fi. It provides a review of the equipment, planning, deployment of an enterprise wireless networks, which is a task that's different from installing a wireless LAN in your home or a small office. Since the early days in design of an enterprise wireless LAN, the equipment has changed significantly. The main reason behind this was to make it easier to plan, design, deploy, manage these large wireless networks, whether it be in large offices, manufacturing plants, corporate campuses, educational institutions, hospitals, conference centers, whatever. Each of these environments demands specific planning and design to ensure user satisfaction and reliability. So we're going to begin by looking at wireless bridges and repeaters. Now, wireless bridges can be used to interconnect wired or wireless networks between two campuses that are beyond the range of a Wi-Fi signal, especially when there are obstacles such as roads that need to be crossed. That can make using a wired connection either impractical or way too expensive to install altogether. Opening up a road to install a fiber optic cable is not an easy cost and can run you up into the millions of dollars. Instead, or you can use telecarriers and rent and pay high monthly fees. But instead, what we've come up with is the 802.11 bridges using directional antennas can be a decent alternative. Multiple bridges and antennas can be combined in a single link to increase the throughput. So, for example, a combined data rate of 3 bridges at 300 meg per second obviously is going to give you 900 meg per second. Even when you consider all the transmission overhead in 802.11, the effective throughput of such a link might be enough to link two networks and support a large, significant number of users. Interference is usually not an issue because with bridges we use a point-to-point link. However, when deploying bridge links using the unlicensed RF band, it is up to the users to ensure that no RF transmissions would be intersecting the directional line of sight. For long-distance links in which the signal takes longer to arrive at the receiver, transmitting wireless bridges can extend the CIFS time by allowing the receiver enough time to acknowledge the frame. Now, extending the CIFS means the wireless bridges operate without fully conforming to the 802.11 standard, but it is an acceptable practice in a bridged environment. Bridge connections can actually be up to 16 miles, but the longer you go on that bridge connection, the slower your data rate will be. So if you need to set up this type of connection, check your bridge specification carefully and use the equipment vendor resources and expertise to test the connection before implementing and supporting your users. Now, wireless bridges are as well as some APs and wireless routers can be configured as repeaters to extend the range of a wireless LAN. A bridge can often be configured to act as a repeater and then connect to an AP. Devices that are out of range of the access point can associate with the bridge, which will then forward the traffic between the devices and the AP. Now, some residential wireless routers and enterprise class APs can also be configured as repeaters. But before purchasing an AP for that purpose, you should carefully check the user manual to make sure that it meets the requirements. So here, you can see a wireless LAN with a repeater. The laptop in the graphic is too far away to connect directly to the AP. So you see that the 802.11 standard protocols allow that only one repeater per AP. The same is true for home wireless routers. Note also that the repeater is not connected to the wired Ethernet network. Because the laptop is out of range of the AP, it is associated with the repeater instead. The laptop must follow all the DCF rules to transmit to the repeater, which must also acknowledge those frames, and then the repeater must go through the same process to forward the frames it receives from the laptop to the AP. And then the process is reversed when the AP transmits frames back to that laptop. Now, network designers should be aware of the extra delay introduced by a repeater in a wireless LAN. Certain kinds of business applications that connect to databases in client-server mode might not be able to tolerate the additional transmission delay. This could result in application issues. Now, you also need to remember that this increased delay reduces the overall throughput of the link even further than if the laptop was communicating directly to that AP. This means that in a wireless LAN that would be operating at a data rate of 300 meg per second, the maximum throughput would normally be 150 meg or less. Then when you add a repeater to the LAN, that throughput will be reduced again by half down to 75 meg per second due to the additional overhead. Now, some APs and wireless routers, wireless residential gateways, can also be configured to extend the range of a wireless LAN. This feature is called Wireless Distribution System, or WDS, and it allows APs and wireless routers to communicate with each other without an Ethernet wired infrastructure. Now, devices can connect wirelessly to the WDS APs or the routers and are not connected to the wired infrastructure, or they can use Ethernet cables as well. Now, the WDS APs or routers act as repeaters or bridges, but also allow wired connections to the communications to client devices. Now, when a large number of APs need to be developed or deployed through a building or campus, managing the wireless LAN by managing each individual device becomes a challenge. So configuration settings can be distributed and administered remotely, but problems such as wireless connectivity and hardware failures usually demand that a technician be sent to the location, which is an expensive way to provide support. So in addition, APs often need to be deployed in branch offices, which increases support delays and costs when no technicians are stationed on site. So the more features an AP has, the more complex it can be to configure and manage. Signal coverage of APs is also difficult to monitor when they're in remote locations. So an alternative way for us to simplify and manage all these of a wireless network and all these wireless access points and stations is to use wireless controllers. Now, these include most of the functionality of the AP and include switch ports that can be used to connect to less complex APs, with a few exceptions. Wireless controllers do not usually have any Wi-Fi radios. In the case of a remote office location, the controllers connect to the remote APs via a logical OSI layer 2 or layer 3 network connection. And then the simplified APs, usually called lightweight APs or LWAPs, consist of a PHY layer device, like a radio, with some MAC layer functionality. Now, the wireless controller handles the interface and communications with the wired LAN and most of the MAC layer functionality. Using the wireless controller and the LWAPs, the management of the wireless LAN can be effectively centralized. So that's the whole goal. As the administrator, you configure the wireless LAN on the controller, including all the parameters of the radios and the configuration, and then we push that out to the APs. So if an AP fails, the controller could be configured to adjust the transmit power on 2 other nearby APs to restore coverage to that area to help overlap. Wi-Fi coverage to the area previously served by the failed AP would then be absorbed by the neighboring APs. Quality of service features incorporated into wireless controllers make it easier to deploy the voice over the wireless LAN, so transmitting your voice calls over the wireless network. The controllers can greatly simplify the deployment and the continuous management of large wireless LANs. A new breed of controllers consisting of cloud-based software that is used to configure and manage the wireless LANs employs APs that handle all the MAC layer functionality and then forward the traffic directly to the wired network without involving software-based controllers. These products make it very easy and simple to deploy and manage a wireless LAN. Next thing we want to discuss are some of the design considerations. So when designing and deploying an enterprise LAN or wireless LAN, there are some considerations that you got to take into account. We've talked about earlier the size of the office or the campus, number of the access points, the security, all that has to be considered. And the design of the enterprise networks usually follows a hierarchical structure, including the core that includes your servers and the main internet connection, a distribution layer that functions as the main interconnections for all the networking nodes, and then finally the access layer where the switches, the APs, the user computers, and the wireless devices all then reside. Bridge connections between buildings are normally treated as a distribution layer technology, and a limited data throughput and range of a Wi-Fi LAN means that this technology would never be deployed at the core layer, the backbone of a network that usually employs your fiber optic technology for your higher data throughput and stuff like that. In this diagram, you can see an example of an access layer network diagram using wireless controllers, your LWAPs, and note that the branch office connection using the wireless controllers and the LWAPs, these are managed by the controller located at the head office. And they have the connection to the branch offices can be made via dedicated communication lines or via the internet using a VPN. And we talk about VPNs later. Remote branch office APs can also be managed using a cloud-based controller if it's compatible. Next thing we want to discuss is going to be Wi-Fi Direct. Now, although it is possible to set up an ad hoc Wi-Fi network since the introduction of the 802.11 standards, configuring laptops, smartphones, printers, and other devices to connect to the wireless LAN has always required a certain amount of technical skill, albeit very, very small amount. It is true, in spite of Windows 0 configuration, universal plug and play, WDS, and other methods that were created in an attempt to simplify configuration tasks for the users. Wi-Fi Direct is a Wi-Fi line specification intended to make it simpler and more convenient for end users to share printers, share files, synchronize devices, play their games, and so on. With Wi-Fi Direct, devices connect to each other at the simple press of a button, or by touching two devices that are near field communication capable. Entering a PIN number to automatically configure and connect two devices to make a peer-to-peer ad hoc mode. Wi-Fi Direct employs a predefined set of configuration parameters, including security, predefined services, depending on the type of the device. Lets users discover other capable devices, and it eliminates the need to manually configure a connection between the two. With Wi-Fi Direct, a connection between two compatible devices is established even when there's not a wireless router or an AP available. Today, you might see a lot of photo and video cameras as well as other types of devices, and include Wi-Fi Direct. And they make it quite simple for users to connect them to their smartphones or tablets. In photo and video cameras, this feature allows users to view the image that the camera will produce, control the camera, and even take the picture remotely. Next, I want to discuss is the wireless LANs and multimedia distribution. So, with the huge growth in the wireless LAN market, it spawned a new range of software and equipment for media distribution in the wirelessly connected home. Now, such as PCs that were dedicated to playing media, high speed and higher capacity wireless LANs, coupled with the WMM specification from the Wi-Fi Alliance, have made many of the products created specifically for distributing media or connecting computers and media projectors makes all that unnecessary. So instead of dedicated standards, media players, devices like Apple TV, Western Digital TV, Roku, your Google Chromecast, your Amazon Fire, and others, they take advantage of an existing wireless LAN to accomplish the same task. So what we're going to look at here, let's going to look at some previous standards that are capable of and specifications that are developed to support multimedia distribution. We're going to compare them and then look at what happens as a result of the development of the recent 802.11 AD standard. Now, this amendment here, the original standard specified operation in the 2.4 gigahertz band, and the amendment introduced in 2009 was developed to support high rate transmissions for multimedia distribution in homes, businesses, hotels, conference centers, etc. Now, the amendment defines operation in the 60 gigahertz band and includes support for the superframe operation, contention access periods, guaranteed time slots, frame aggregation, omnidirectional and quasi-omnidirectional transmission using beamforming. Okay? But since 2003, two industry associations were formed by several well-known manufacturers of TV, video, and audio equipment. These organizations created specifications for transmitting HDMI audio and video signals wirelessly to a compatible device. The wireless HD specification transmits video and audio on the 60 gigahertz band and has a range of 30 feet. Now, some add-on equipment is available in both the business and consumer markets that support the wireless HD and WHDI specifications, but also Also, although many of the same TV and audio manufacturers are members of the organizations that are behind these technologies, and their market penetration has been limited so far. Now, to date, 2 models of Dell Alienware laptops have been produced and sold that incorporate the wireless HD interfaces. In addition to the laptop, users must also purchase a receiver device to connect to their TV sets in order to play the PC games using that wireless connection. Dell also offers a dock for PCs or laptops that allows wireless connection to desktop monitors, and that's using the Wireless Home Digital Interface, or WHDI. The association specification utilizes 5 gigahertz band and can transmit signals at 1080p or to a 1080p compatible television from a laptop or a desktop. Okay. Neither of these technologies, however, is compatible with 802.11. Now, as we talked about in the last lesson, the IEEE introduced the 802.11ad amendment along with the Wi-Fi Alliance's specifications, which make it possible for devices to switch seamlessly between the 60 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz band using 802.11ac. When the transmission at the higher frequency band is not possible due to maybe obstacles or distances, whatever. Now, the feature of 802.11ad is likely to eventually make wireless HD and WHDI equipment redundant, but this might not happen until the 802.11ad is included with video monitors and business audio equipment. In the meantime, WHDI and the wireless HD equipment will likely continue to be available as upgrades to your audio and your video devices. In the future, seems like we're going to have to, it'll make more sense for everyone to standardize on the 802.11ac/AD. And then a few manufacturers already provide residential wireless routers and laptops with the AD compatible wireless network cards. Next thing we want to discuss is our security. No discussion of wireless LANs should even occur without talking about security. Broadcasting network traffic over electromagnetic waves has created an entirely new set of issues for keeping your data transmission secure. It was one of the drawbacks that many of us as network administrators had to consider when we first started bringing wireless communication into our networks. It was the fear of anyone being able to get on our wireless LANs. Now, the security measures originally defined in 802.11 were broken within a matter of minutes. Since then, both the IEEE and the Wi-Fi Alliance have done a lot of work to improve the security. Now, because the 802.11 standard defines how data is transmitted at the PHY and MAC layers, the security implementations are similar to those used in an Ethernet network. However, because wireless transmissions utilize EM waves, which are not connected to wires, information transmitted on a wireless LAN is much more exposed to intrusion, jamming, and hijacking than that of a wired LAN. So no security measure can prevent all potential breaches. That's just a fact of life. Whether it be wired or wireless networks, security in itself is always going to be considered a work in progress. Network admins must check systems and logs regularly to ensure that security has not been compromised. Some types of unsecured connections, such as hotspots, can expose a company's LAN or a wireless LAN to security attacks and breaches unless they take a number of steps to stop it. The IEEE standard, 802.11 standard, defines several steps for securing wireless LANs, along with the support for keeping data private through the use of encryption. And the first thing is the authentication. The process of verifying that a device has permission to access a wireless LAN. The authentication process only verifies that the device is allowed to access the wired network via the AP. It doesn't check on the username. It only checks for the device. A wireless device only knows that it is connecting to a wireless LAN using the SSID and the password provided by the user, but it cannot determine if the AP is actually part of the enterprise wireless LAN. In other words, it could be a rogue AP that somebody set up on the network. In a BSS or ESS, a device can be configured with the SSID of the wireless LAN, or in most cases, a user can simply select the SSID from a list. By default, the APs automatically transmit the SSID of the wireless LAN in every beacon frame. Then the SSID of the wireless LAN is also included in a beacon frame transmitted in an ad hoc wireless LAN as well. An admin can display or can configure the APs to hide or not transmit the SSID. However, if an AP receives a probe request frame from an active scanning device, the 802.11 standard specifies that the AP must send a probe response frame that would include the SSID of the wireless LAN. Privacy is different from authentication. Authentication ensures the device has permission to be part of the network. Privacy is part of a group of processes that attempts to ensure that unauthorized persons who may be able to capture the wireless transmissions will not be able to decode and understand the data. That application or process is accomplished using encryption, which basically just scrambles the data according to complex mathematical formulas in a way that it cannot be read. The strength of the encryption rests on keeping the keys a secret, but also with the length of the key itself. The longer the key, the stronger the encryption, because longer keys are more difficult to break. The trade-off is the stronger encryption increases the number of bits of data being transmitted, which in turn decreases the overall throughput of the wireless LAN. We all started out with this one here, and at the time we thought it was pretty good. It turned out it wasn't great, but this wired equivalency privacy, which is today considered a legacy encryption, I mean it came out in 1997, it was better than nothing. Now it was used to encrypt the data between wireless devices to help prevent eavesdropping. The encryption is a shared key that must be entered on the AP in all devices allowed to connect to the wireless LAN. And then web encryption comes in two versions, 64-bit and 128-bit. And former uses a 40-bit key, 5 bytes or 10 hexadecimal digits, plus a 24-bit initialization vector, which is part of the encryption key, but is transmitted as clear text or unencrypted before the encrypted data. Likewise, 128-bit encryption uses a 104-bit key plus 24-bit. Some vendors offered a 256-bit encryption, which was not part of the 802.11 standard, and then could cause compatibility issues. Now, in 2001, researchers at various universities outlined just how an attacker could collect the necessary data for breaking web encryption. So in late 2001, they were able to break the 128-bit WEP key used in a wireless LAN in just less than 2 hours. So in 2005, the time to break WEP encryption was reduced to less than 2 minutes when the attacker was able to capture 200,000 frames. WEP uses a weak implementation of an encryption, RC4, which was developed by Ron Rivas for RSA Data Security Incorporated. Except in the case of some older home networks, it should not be used today to secure any wireless LANs. WPA is a standard for encryption used by the Wi-Fi Alliance in response to the weakness of the WEP. Uses a 128-bit pre-shared key, or PSK, also known as the WPA personal. Needs to be manually added to the configuration of every device that will be connected to the wireless LAN. Unlike WEP, it uses a different encryption key for each client device for each packet and for each communication session. It is not suitable for larger companies with many client devices because the passphrase has to be created by the user and manually entered on both the AP and the devices. Strong passphrases should be longer than 8 bytes and should include a mixture of letters, numbers, non-alphanumeric characters. Passphrase is used by the hardware to generate an encryption key, and this key is then rotated based on a user configurable timer that is often set to 300 seconds or 5 minutes. This mode does not offer the same level of protection as enterprise class systems that rely on the authentication server installed somewhere else on the network. WPA uses a TKIP, or a temporal key integrity protocol, which provides per packet and per session key mixing. So in other words, each packet and each web page requested uses a different security key for encryption. In addition, TKIP also includes message integrity check, which uses a combination of variable and static data items such as the current network uptime and other data items to ensure that the encrypted data has not been tampered with. TKIP uses a 48-bit hashed, or what we call scrambled, initialization vector, and WPA also includes methods necessary for the AP to change the keys and transmit the new key to all client devices. Of course, as with WEP, we had to move on from WPA to WPA2, just stronger encryption. Also, that AAA certified WPA2 is compatible with 802.11i, which is described next. Both add support for Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES, established by the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology. When using AES encryption, the TKIP will not be used. Now, the 802.11i amendment ratified in 2004 was a result of a series of efforts by the IEEE to deal with security weaknesses of the original wireless LAN standards. The 802.11i is a grouping of several security functions that protects wireless LAN data frames by providing mutual authentication between wireless devices and access points, controlled access to the network. Establishment of security keys and key management, and together with 802.11.1x, a series of recommendations for implementation of a grouping of security functions. 802.11i defines the RSNA, which is the Robust Security Network Association, which is the end result of using 802.11.1x. In an 802.11i, a client device must be authenticated on the network by an external authentication server, such as a Radius server, which stands for Remote Authentication Dial-in User Service. So if you are, say, on a Windows server and you went to my user profile, not my profile, but you went to Active Directory and you double-clicked and went to the properties of my user, you would then see a tab on there called dial-in, and then there you would choose whether or not I can dial in. I'm not technically dialing in with a phone. It's what you're specifying whether or not I am allowed to use the Radius server. So here you can see that when all communications between the mobile device and the wired network are blocked until the authentication process is completed, after which protection through the encryption and the MIC are enabled. So only when communication between the wireless devices and the wired network is allowed, okay, do we actually end up with communication. The radius server had to do the authentication. 802.1x uses the Extensible Authentication Protocol, or EAP, for relaying access requests between a wireless device and the AP and the radius server. Now, there are several variations of the EAP, each supporting a different authentication method and its associated network security policies. For EAP to work, all three devices must support the same authentication method. So when EAP is used, the network administrator does not need to configure a WPA passphrase or a web key on each computer. The radius server provides the key to the AP, which then provides it to the wireless device. This saves configuration effort and the time both initially and when the key is periodically changed. This method of authentication also indirectly verifies to the client device that it is communicating with an authorized AP instead of a hacker's computer impersonating to be the enterprise AP. Now, have you ever seen that little button on the side of your computer that had like a little refresh symbol on it? That is your Wi-Fi protected setup button. A lot of home users who install wireless networks fail to set up security properly, leaving their networks exposed to hackers. Most vendors today implement a method specified by the Wi-Fi Alliance called WPS, or Wi-Fi Protected Setup. Simplifies the process of securing the wireless LAN. It's simple. You go to the setup properties on your computer, and you can choose to use Wi-Fi protected setup if your computer is capable. You click that button, and then you click the button on your home router. It'll start flashing, and without transferring any phrases, passphrases, encryption, knowledge about your network, it'll pass the information wirelessly to the two devices and pair them, essentially, associate them so that your devices are now hooked up. For example, I took a Wi-Fi extender, which has a WPS button on it. I plugged it into the wall, hit the WPS button on the extender, went over to my router, hit the WPS button there, and it programmed the extender. So if my network was called Bridge House, then it automatically named my extender BridgeHouse-EXT for Bridge House Extender. And then I could just go into another room where my signal was weak, plug in my extender, and I now have the two devices paired in an extended my wireless network. Next, I want to talk about some VPNs, or virtual private network. VPNs use a specialized protocol that create it's called a tunnel between the 2 points over a public network. So think of it as you would have your cloud, okay, and everybody can communicate in the cloud. But I want my information to run through a nice conduit or a pipe, or in this case we call it a tunnel, okay? Packets from each network are encrypted and encapsulated in VPN PDUs that can only be unencapsulated and decrypted when they get to the destination network, which gives us the whole tunnel concept. VPNs use strong encryption algorithms such as AES. They're the most secure method that can be used to access a corporate network from a remote location. With two basic types of VPN implementations. We got a site-to-site VPN, which are used to interconnect two LANs across a public network. Think of that like you're maybe at the Midtown campus at Hack, but it seems as though you're actually at the main Harrisburg campus, or you're at the Gettysburg campus, or you're at the York campus. You're all on the same network, but you're geographically not. And we can connect them, those campuses, through a VPN. That would be an example of a site-to-site VPN. I've created these, for example, for one of my customers. We have the main office building, and then we have another building, we'll call it a sub-building. And I put a site-to-site VPN in between the two, and whoever's over in the sub-building, when they log on to the domain as if they're sitting at their main office. They log on to the domain, and the connection is made automatically. They can print, they can access the file servers, everything else. And the only thing that they've got at their main office building or at the sub-office building is just a PC, and what I have in there is a firewall appliance to make the site-to-site VPN connect. We also have a client-to-site VPNs. These are usually used for your mobile users or your home users who need to connect. So, for example, from here, I could run a VPN connection from my home office, for example, and then be able to connect to the main office and have access to all of the corporate resources. Next thing we want to talk about is intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. These devices today have pretty much just come into one. Most business networks implement one or more methods of detecting when an intruder attempts to hack into their wireless networks. A wireless intrusion prevention system, or a WIPS or WIPS, standalone wireless device, or a feature of some advanced AP. And some advanced APs can be deployed to monitor the RF spectrum and detect the presence of unauthorized APs. So when a wireless intrusion prevention system detects an unauthorized wireless router, it can be configured to automatically force wireless devices to disconnect from the unauthorized router or AP, basically rendering it useless. The WIDS differs from the WIPS in that it sends a notification to the system admin instead of acting automatically when it detects an intrusion. It's then up to the administrator to locate and remove the unauthorized AP. In addition to the security strategies that we talked about, you can increase wireless LAN security by reducing the wireless LAN transmission power. Basically, you make the radius around the AP smaller. However, keep in mind that if an attacker equipped with a high gain directional antenna, they'd be able to still detect your RF signal. So changing the default security settings on your AP is probably the first most important step in wireless LAN security. Don't forget antivirus and anti-spyware software. Mobile wireless clients are exposed to more of these threats when operating outside company offices. And then they can introduce threats into your corporate network once they're connected. So it's one of those things that we as network admins used to fuss the most about when we came up with this whole bring your own device on the networks. The BYOD policies, there were white paper after white paper developed on those because you're at home, you're surfing the internet willy-nilly like crazy. You don't know where you're going. You're clicking on all these ads and whatever on Facebook and Twitter and just browsing the web, shopping. You're on Craigslist. Who knows what you're doing? I don't want to know what you're doing. And you may have an infection on your computer and that you don't know about, maybe some spyware or a worm, and then you connect to my corporate network, and now your garbage is on my network, and that's an issue. Okay, so for highly secure wireless LANs, administrators usually separate wireless LAN traffic from their corporate network. They separate their network. Some of the more dangerous are hardware loss or theft, are some of the biggest problems that we have. But normally what I would do, on my network, is I'm going to put a firewall in between you and me on my network. It's especially important on corporate network to allow a guest wireless device to connect to your wireless LAN for internet access. Keep a separate Wi-Fi network. That's why, if you remember, in the 125 classes, when we did a network design, we had a data network, we had a Wi-Fi network, we had a voice network, and then we had a guest network. And we always say this Wi-Fi network here has to be separate from this network here, or whatever. A variety of attacks can be employed against wireless LANs. Some of the more dangerous are hardware loss or theft, which I just inadvertently mentioned a second ago. AP impersonation, that's a big one. Passive monitoring. Think of AP impersonation as this. Let's say you are Christmas shopping and you are out at the mall and you stop in at, let's say, Panera Bread for a lunch. And while you're there, you decide you want to do some shopping on Amazon. You hop on the store's free Wi-Fi. You get on the Wi-Fi and it says Panera Bread Wi-Fi, right? And she's cool. You hop on, it's open, and little do you know, Panera Bread does their Wi-Fi is not called Panera Bread Wi-Fi. But you hopped on it because it looked legit. You hopped on that, and now you're on somebody else's Wi-Fi, rogue AP, impersonating to be the good AP. The theft or loss of mobile devices is an example of a serious threat. Not uncommon, we know that. Some devices automatically have the ability, when you join them to a corporate network, the corporation has the ability to remote wipe a device in that case. You want to be cautious of what's called a man-in-the-middle attack as well. Passive monitoring is an attack when an attacker simply captures data transmissions. Can also be used to acquire information, such as, say, a MAC address or an IP addresses of APs and wireless clients. Over time, the attacker can build then a profile of a wireless LAN and may be able to use this information to break into the network at a later date. What can you do? Use MAC filters to enhance your security. Using a MAC filter to enhance your security means that you know of all the devices that you're going to allow to connect to your network. Okay, remember, when we associate, we are associating the device, not the user. So you could take all the MAC addresses that are coming into your network, that everyone who you trust and have signed on to your network. Now, what would happen is only those MAC addresses would be the ones that are allowed to communicate with the network. So you can choose to deny MAC addresses, or you can choose to allow MAC addresses. That would be a MAC filter. Okay. It is considered to be weak because we can do something called MAC spoofing. Okay. Now, in MAC spoofing, what we can do is, if we've been spending time and learning about your network and building our plan, we've had the ability to then intercept MAC addresses that were going across the wireless airways. And then we now know your MAC address. We know that your MAC address is allowed to talk to that AP. Therefore, we will spoof or clone our address to make it appear that we are you, and that we're not only allowed to get on your network, but since it's our MAC address, we're the ones, since our MAC address is now your MAC address, we're the ones who are intercepting your data. And that's important to understand, because the data goes to the MAC address first as it follows up through the OSI reference model. So before we even get to the IP address, we have to get to the MAC address. The MAC address comes to me. And since I spoofed your MAC address, I have your data and you don't. So that's why MAC filtering is considered to be a weak security method. It's not employed or deployed as much as security, but once again, you combine that with other versions of security, and you should be fine. Okay. That concludes our chapter on expanding and wireless security for today, and I'll catch you later.